My wife became pregnant after my brother initially brought misery into my life. After our parents disowned him and left me $2 million, he seeks my assistance. My younger brother David has always singled me out in his fury. Despite what is commonly believed, the scenario was not initiated by envy. He was the favored child, not me. He could not possibly be jealous of me. To set the scene, David always received kindness from our mother. Of all our children, he was the most cherished. She cooked and washed his clothes, even requested that I assist him with his homework. I was meant to aid him because we were connected, but I never received the same attention. I was independent, therefore I came to terms with it. It could have been my fault for always providing for his necessities without asking for anything in return. He never assisted me, he always got in touch with me when he needed something. Like his father, he was boisterous and crazy, unlike me, who was shy and introverted who wanted to study and spend time alone. But I never mince words, I'm straightforward. My mother probably didn't like me because I'm honest. David became the family sweetheart as a result of his favoritism, but as we were still growing up, I didn't mind. The issues started when he made fun of and teased me for being different from him. He also made fun of my glasses in addition to my height. He would read my diary and then slip into my room to complain to my mother. Our parents laughed and dismissed my outrage at him for invading my private when I complained about it. I was furious that he had invaded my private. He committed more evil, like almost breaking my eyeglasses and contaminating my food. Before they broke my teeth, I discovered the cereal stones. He once included them in my morning meal. When I told my mother, she laughed and said that's how brothers get along. When we disagreed, David would make fun of me for my fears. He was aware that I was being bullied by several pupils because we attended the same school. Referring to me as an ugly loser and hairy monkey, he encouraged the bullies to beat me and said I was a failure. Rather than supporting me, he helped the bullies bolster their claims. Once, when we were fighting over something so insignificant that I can't even remember what it was, he told me to kill myself. Most insults were easily ignored by me, but that one hurt since I was having mental health issues. Even though I've improved since then, it still hurt to know that my brother detested and desired my death. My mother chastised me once for making my father angry because he was frequently absent from work, and she didn't seem to care. It was horrifying when David attempted to burn my hair in high school. In an odd way, our mother claimed he was playing. Who takes themselves so seriously? Thankfully, my dad acknowledged the problem and agreed with me. He made a threat to call the police and report David. My brother has never before received punishment for his actions. Thus this was really illuminating. David was taught to respect his elder brother by my father. His finding had left him speechless. After a while, my father came into my room to speak. I never expected David's support, because he kept telling David how similar they were, which was true. Dad acknowledged that he had been waiting for David to grow up for years, but he was starting to notice that David was turning into a serious bully. My father's reassurance was so comforting that I nearly started crying. I told David everything that he had done to me over the years, including bullying at school, when I made my confession. My struggles horrified my father. He discussed the harsh repercussions of the bully's behavior with the principal the following day. Later that evening, my father enrolled me in MMA at our local gym after telling me I had to be strong and defend myself from bullies. I know learning to fight seems stupid coming from a nerdy kid like myself, but I was committed. My body and life were transformed by mixed martial arts lessons, which I scheduled to balance with my studies. David returned to his shenanigans one day. In exchange for helping with chores, he took my pocket money. I had set it aside for the time being. David entered my room without my permission. Just before he rode off with his pals on his bike, I managed to catch him. When I requested David to return my money, he made fun of me and said I had to go to my father for assistance. I had no idea why I punched him in the face. He fell back, looking shocked, and I grabbed my money out of his pocket and threw him to the ground. David made a lot of jokes with his loud weeping, but my mother hurried to assist him and investigate. She was startled to learn that I had battled with him and reprimanded me, telling me to set a better example for David, who seemed to take pleasure in my criticism. My mother also informed my father that because of my behavior, I required supervision. With sternness, My father asked us to explain ourselves. David attempted to justify his theft by claiming that I was his brother and that I should assist him since he needed the money for a date. David's father, however, informed him that anyone else would have contacted the police, so it was fortunate that I merely punched him for stealing. David was reminded by him that he was not allowed to take property belonging to others. David lost his mind, maybe thinking that our mother would support him, but our father remained steadfast. David became enraged and ran to his room, shutting himself in, after realizing he would not be punished for being assaulted. David stopped being close to me after that. At last he recognized that even his father could not condone his awful actions and that he could no longer scare me. For the first time in a long time, I felt equal. He was unable to hurt me physically, but he nevertheless verbally abused me in the absence of our parents. His attitude and fury grew worse as he grew older. When I asked him a question, he would scream nerd or loser and dismiss me. He departed. If he needed to talk to me, he would talk to our mother. When I inquired why David couldn't talk to me, she told me to have more patience. I couldn't determine if it was hatred or puberty. His remarks were unbearable, and I was itching to go. I was ready to go. My mother often turned down our requests to have a sit-down conversation about our problems. She refused to do this despite my repeated requests. My questions regarding why David had treated me so poorly were rejected by her. After a while, I won a scholarship to the university of my choice because I was the best student. My mother appeared content, and my father hosted a feast for me. David continued to be aloof and unthankful of my accomplishments. I was relieved to be leaving my toxic home and full of hope for the future on the day I departed for university. When I first started college, it felt freeing. I enjoyed my classes, met new acquaintances, and began creating a life for myself after escaping my restrictive upbringing. My ongoing fear of David's verbal abuse diminished, and I became more at ease. In my second year, I met my future wife, Karen, at a fraternity party thanks to a buddy, and we immediately clicked. It was considered improper from a religious standpoint to have children without getting married. When we found out she was pregnant in our senior year, we made the decision to tie the knot as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was happy even though it was little. We spent a wonderful day honoring our parents. I thought Karen was my soulmate at the moment. I always saw myself coming home to a single woman in a monogamous relationship to share my life with. Over the years, I received advances from other ladies, but I never followed them up since I was content in my marriage. My ideal woman was Karen, and I didn't intend to harm her. Later, I found evidence of 2 adulterous relationships in our marriage. While visiting her family, she briefly dated her ex-boyfriend and had an intermittent affair with her married coworker for years. Both partnerships ended abruptly. Upon more reflection, I acknowledged that some people perceive me as naive. Whenever my wife and I were apart, I was forgiving. I was of the opinion that we could resolve these issues and that our child should not grow up in a dysfunctional family. I said my affair with her coworker was the result of my immaturity and poor judgment. Things appeared to get better. I attempted to relax myself, even though I knew I could never trust her again. I knew I would have to make a great effort to forgive her. Given that her second deception had occurred 4 years prior, I knew that giving her another chance was the right thing to do. Karen seemed to have transformed, which gave us great pleasure as we discussed the future of our family. My life was ruined once more 3 months ago when she said that she had been having an affair for a long time and that our boy might not be mine. Her remarks came as a huge shock to me. Bewilderment, betrayal, and incredulity overcame me. I'm grateful. I found it difficult to comprehend the depth of her confession. I was able to question her about how she could have done something so awful and why she kept such a large secret, even if I was perplexed. She answered coldly, as if emotionally distant from the agony she caused. Her ambiguous remarks caused me to have more questions than answers. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant to face my mistrust of my family and my destroyed trust. I felt I had a right to know the father of the child I had been nurturing from birth, so I kept asking Karen the truth. At last, she conceded that David was at fault. My eyes grew wide with surprise as I asked Karen what she meant. She added that when I introduced her to my family, she and David became friends, and she spent Thanksgiving through New Year's with us. I was relieved that David treated Karen with kindness instead of his normal cold demeanor because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. Karen wanted to be a part of my family, so she tried to spend as much time as she could with my mother. She noticed my divide with David and inquired about it. I acknowledged that our relationship was shaky and forewarned him that his unresolved feelings would keep us apart. Karen realized, but in an effort to strengthen our relationship, she began to involve David in our activities. Every time she asked David what movie he thought we should watch, we invariably ended up watching it. David usually stayed silent, so I was relieved that we could converse during this period. I never really noticed that Karen and David were playing video games. Karen informed me that David had discussed his issues and separation with her. He made friends with her because of his weakness. She said that when I was away, he would casually flirt with her, and things would spiral out of control. Observing my brother and wife sharing a bed made me feel uneasy and lightheaded. That's why Karen made the snap decision to head home rather than spend New Year's Eve with me. She felt bad and cut off from him. I tried so hard to hold her back, but she went. When we reconnected at college after the holidays, she was in her typical upbeat mood, so I didn't worry. 2 weeks later, we found out she was expecting. Karen stayed with me because I was the more trustworthy sibling, even though she knew she couldn't determine if the child was mine or David's. That's why we got married. It appeared as though my world was abruptly ending. It may not be my son, my dear one. When I asked if Karen had had any recent sex with David, she gave me a subtle nod. She claimed that due of their chemistry, they never stopped conversing. They would pretend to be working overtime while hiding out in hotels. She acknowledged that she spent half of her work holidays on amorous trips with him. Karen stated she didn't want to end the marriage when I asked why she married me if she wanted my brother. Seeing as how well I raised our son, she made the decision to stay. She claimed that she erred and failed to recognize when to give up. In addition to telling Karen I was leaving, I thanked her for being honest. She begged for my pardon when she started crying and thought I would scream. Rather, I calmly packed my clothes. She suggested that since mistakes are inevitable in each marriage, I should fight for Karen if I truly loved her. Errors happen, she said. When she realized I wouldn't do anything, she reversed course and said that our son would suffer from a divorce and that children shouldn't grow up in homes where there is constant strife. She started crying even more and called me cruel when I told her that I might not be the child's father. It seems that she believed that I would never leave the marriage. It's possible that I helped with earlier poor management. Though I believed it was more because we had a son and had been together since college, I still loved her. I became impatient with Karen because she insisted that things could still be fixed, even though I didn't trust her. Her words were hollow, and trust was a big problem. I never forgot that she had slept with my brother, no matter how much I had forgiven her. We're all fallible, so I've always been willing to overlook mistakes, but this was unacceptable. I left her sobbing on the threshold and went into a motel. I told my parents about my wife's affair with David the following day, revealing the years they had been having hidden affairs. They were shocked at their looks. My mother, of course, stood up for David, saying he would never harm his brother. I requested my folks to keep silent so I could phone David and tell him the truth. To surprise David, I asked everyone to keep quiet. He assumed that was a private conversation. When I called David to confront him about the affair, he answered. He fiercely rejected it and shied away from accepting accountability. But he swiftly denounced Karen and called her a coward when I told him she had confessed. He said that since he was the more attractive sibling, it wasn't his fault if ladies found him appealing. I firmly warned him that I would reveal his identity to everyone. I laughed at David's boldness and thanked him for pointing out the truth, as I knew our parents had heard everything. David made fun of me by claiming that since he was the golden child, nobody would ever trust me. David became silent and stammered as he tried to salvage his reputation. Still in disbelief, my mother pushed David to give an explanation. He scrambled to make excuses, blaming everybody but himself, attempting valiantly to place the burden on Karen. Everyone responsible for his deeds was held accountable. I saw my mother, unhappy and angry now that she had shielded her favorite son. A strange sense of vindication came over me during that nervous time. I saw David suffering for years. The roles were reversed once the truth came to light. Both David and his deeds were revealed. My silent father's dismay was evident as he watched David stumble over his words. He asked me for the phone and got to work chatting to David. "David," my father murmured in a melancholy voice, "your behavior betrays this family and your sibling. You had sex with your brother's wife even after their marriage. We no longer have faith in you, and your actions have severely damaged that faith. You were brought up with a strong emphasis on morality, loyalty, and family." He paused to give his comments time to register. Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable," he said. "You've wounded him and harmed our roots. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you, even if your mother and I are somewhat accountable for your growth. This behavior will no longer be accepted. I will be giving up the college money I set up for you today. You are responsible for covering your own university expenses. I'll also quit providing for your way of life. Is having sex with married women a sign of manliness? Compare how you manage without my money. I maintained my composure the entire time. The most vindication I got came from seeing my father reprimand David, even if I had to yell at him at first. I had shown him who he really was. Besides, he had grossly overestimated the repercussions. My mother supported David even though he complained. My father abruptly ended the call, cutting off David's attempts to defend his actions. A little later, my mother gave me a hug. We hadn't shared a moment like this in a long time, but even with the turmoil in the family, that embrace was one of understanding and support. After all this time, she apologized for not trusting me. When I was 14, I could never have envisioned this, having my mother's acceptance during this period. My father assisted me in locating a competent attorney for my divorce from Karen. Since I made more money than she did, even if her affair helped me, she and her lawyer attempted to fight me dirty by requesting alimony. Additionally, we ran a paternity test which established David's fatherhood. Up until now, the news was more distressing than Karen's adultery. The fact that my dear boy was not mine infuriated me. I made the decision to persevere. Karen urged that I visit my kid even if I couldn't, because he shouldn't be penalized. I detested David, and he made me think of him. I felt liberated when I moved into my own bachelor apartment after my divorce was finalized. As someone who was married young and had never known freedom, living alone was unusual to me. But I was able to rapidly adjust to my new lifestyle because to my independence, which I found enjoyable. A fortnight ago, when my father called, he said he was thinking about modifying his will so David wouldn't receive any inheritance. Due to his stubbornness, my father never gave up on his decision to cut David out of his life. David even went to our parents' front door to beg for forgiveness and made other attempts to get in touch with them, but they refused to let him in, usually caving in to David's tantrums. My mother looked to have had enough of him, even though it had to have been difficult. David showed that he did not regret his conduct by refusing to text me to apologize. To put it plainly, he was furious about being taken away from our parents. In order to prevent David from questioning it, my father promised me he would leave everything to me. David would receive $1. I was shocked to see how hard-working my dad had been all of his life. He had about $2 million in assets, retirement funds, and life insurance. Even though ownership would transfer to me upon his retirement, his will only required my mother to reside in their home in the event that my father passed away before her. I wanted to stay with my mother in her last days, so I didn't mind. David understood this yesterday and apologized to me over the phone for not being able to get through to our parents. He was informed that Karen had been requesting child support from him ever since she found out he was the father, and that he was having financial difficulties in college. He tried unsuccessfully to find a part-time work and financial aid. He needed my support, so he urged me to talk to our family about making a fresh start. I told him I was done with him and laughed at him. He had a sexual encounter with my wife, and I informed him that he ought to have thought about the implications when she got pregnant. David claimed I was being unreasonable, and I accepted that some of the problem lay with Karen. I told him I was divorcing her, and from then on she was his responsibility, given that he did these things. He is not entitled to call me to vent about the wife or child. When David began to scream, I stopped him and told him that he was now the one who had slept with his brother's wife, the black sheep. David started to speak up, but I cut him off. David broke down in tears and told me how our grandparents and other family members had turned against him. I knew this, but it didn't matter to me anymore. I told him we were done and that he should never call me again since I no longer thought of him as my brother. I haven't stopped thinking about that chat since. I hated my brother so much, yet I'd never heard him weep since we were kids. Being truthful, it wounded me to see him defenseless. I suppose the reason I'm here is to inquire whether it would be foolish of me to not bring him up with our parents. Many of you have inquired as to why I severed all ties with my son Henry, and others have referred to me as harsh. I don't feel comfortable parenting a man's child, not the case of a stepson. I mistook Henry for my son David, but he's actually my brother's. I was devastated to learn this, and I sobbed for days. I don't want to talk to Henry because I don't want Karen in my life anymore. If I stay in contact with her kid, she will find a way to come back to me. I require seclusion. I'm not going to see him again for a very long time, no matter how cruel or self-centered you think I am. The majority of you correctly identified my mother as the one who told David about the alteration to my father's will. David gave me a call in an attempt to make things right. When I spoke to her in front of my father, she sobbed and told me I had reprimanded David enough and he had learned his lesson. My mother was persuaded by my father that David's actions were pardonable. He ended their marriage because he could never forgive her for betraying him in such a way. With this warning, my mother fell silent. If she talked to David again and we found out the truth, my father made it clear that she may leave. Like I said, my dad is a prick. I think my mom will gain knowledge from her experiences. Update 3 can be found on Reddit. It has been 5 months since my previous update. Recently, my dad and I have had a better relationship. Every week, my dad and I go golfing. He also treats me more like a friend than a kid. My mother hasn't spoken to David at all, even though she misses him. According to my relative, David had been pleading for money and was forced to leave college due to financial difficulties. In addition to being a technician, he shares a home with Karen. It appears that they are raising Henry together, which is wonderful. David was never brought up by my parents or me. I'm doing well. Everyone who has asked says. After I was promoted 2 months ago, my pay increased dramatically. I feel like I need time to recuperate, therefore I haven't gone out on dates. We'll see what happens now that I've started treatment. I appreciate you seeing. Kindly click the notification button and subscribe to stay informed about more incredible true tales in your community.